HTC, Oculus, or PlayStation? Whose VR system should you plan to buy?
And will NBN Co's soft cap pricing make any change to your broadband bill? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Adam Turner, a man who is starting to suspect that I've trapped him in his own elaborate virtual reality setup. Adam, what kind of clues gave away that you were living the Truman life?
I think it would have to be when that much cooler version of you turned up and started saying, "Smoke me a kipper, I'll be back for breakfast."
Ace Kidman. What a guy. We're also joined in the virtual Vertical Hold studio by Finder Innovations editor Chris Stead. Chris, welcome to the show.
G'day, gentlemen. How are you?
We're good. It's been a big week in the world of VR, with HTC announcing a pair of premium virtual reality headsets at its 5Con event. We'll be deep diving into the specs as well as how they compare to existing and upcoming offerings from the likes of Oculus and Sony. No VR goggles required.
But first, we caught up with Phil Britt, Managing Director of our podcast sponsor, Aussie Broadband, to talk about what's happening with NBN's pricing structure. Hi, Phil. Welcome back to the show.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
So the NBN really is the story that keeps on giving. It's kept this podcast going for a long time.
Our soup du jour.
Indeed. It is our soup du jour. And there's been a lot of talk recently about potential changes to the NBN's pricing structure and its data allocations. So before we dive into that, I just sort of wanted to cover the basics. When people talk about NBN data and pricing, they talk about things like CVC and AVC. What do they mean and how do they work?
So I guess the way to think about it is the AVC component is the connection at your house. And so that represents the speed that you buy, whether that be a 50/20 service or a 140 service, that kind of thing. So that's what the AVC is about.
And that's a fixed price.
And that's a fixed price that providers pay to access that component. Yep.
And then what about the CVC?
So the CVC side of things, this is ultimately a variable component. And so it gets a little murky here. And what NBN does is they provide a certain amount of CVC for each AVC that you get. And so that gives providers the ability to make sure that they provision a minimum amount of bandwidth. But ultimately, it's all about the volume, how much people download and upload and how much capacity they use.
So that means for you as the retailer, your price can, for me as a customer, your price for me can go up and down depending on how much data I use or how much bandwidth I use. But me as the end customer, I'm still paying a flat rate no matter what, as long as I stick within my plan. So you're kind of in the middle that you have to wear it if I use too much, and you have to hope that the guy next door uses not enough to make up for it.
And that's exactly it. It's all based on averages. And so, if you use more, we need people to offset it to use less. Otherwise, we pay more.
Yeah.
Okay, so we saw last year during the pandemic, the whole CVC boost, which NBN just kind of kept on renewing throughout the year, and was certainly welcomed by most ISPs. But what's this new soft cap thing they're talking about? Because that's a different thing, isn't it?
Yeah, the soft cap is a different thing, and it's all about making sure that if something like COVID happened again, or if usage was outside of the normal profile, then it would kick in. And initially when it came out, we sort of thought, oh, this might look okay. But when we started to actually model it, if usage is about 20% higher than what it is today, and it's worth noting that usage tends to grow by about 20 to 25% year on year anyway, then the soft cap doesn't actually trigger. It's only if usage goes beyond 22% that the soft cap in some examples I've run would actually kick in. So it looks good on the surface, but it doesn't actually make a huge amount of difference if things are traveling as they would normally travel.
So you need a kind of spike in usage outside the norm for it to kick in at all.
Yeah, effectively you'd need a second set of COVID-type lockdowns to probably generate a situation where this would be beneficial.
I think we could all do without that, to be honest. But so we'll say it was going up at 20%. Well, what does it normally go up with on average anyway, COVID aside?
Look, if you look across the industry, 20% year on year is the growth that it's been. We pulled some figures in from the ACCC back to 2016, and it's been 20% year on year growth since then.
So we'll say it does grow 20% year on year. That's the amount of bandwidth that customers use. But that's not quite enough to trigger this soft cap where the NBN would start to rein in the pricing a little bit. What kind of impact does that have on retailers such as yourself if the bandwidth usage goes up by 20% every year?
Look, if bandwidth goes up by 20% every year and NBN does nothing else to mitigate that, so they don't provide any additional inclusions or things like that, then ultimately, if we want to continue providing the same speeds that customers are used to and not increase the retail price, then ultimately we have to accept a lower margin. So basically our margins start to go down. Now, naturally, that we're a business at the end of the day. Like all businesses, we're here to make a margin, and the margin in NBN is relatively modest at the end of the day. So ultimately, two things will happen on an industry basis: either retail prices will go up, or peak time speeds will go down.
And is that I can't remember what the mathematical term it is, but if I use 20% more data, does that cost you 20% more CVC, or is it an even rise, or is it exponential? I think that's the fancy word I'm looking for.
Yeah, it's a really good thing, and CVC is highly leveraged. So if usage goes up 20%, our cost on overage, which is the excess CVC, will actually double. So it's not a case that our cost goes up 20%, our cost on the overage component actually doubles.
So without getting too much into the graphs and so on of it, does that mean that there is in fact a logical point of overage where you're losing money by having customers at all?
Correct. If usage just continued to rise and there was no mitigation and retail prices didn't change, then you'd actually start losing money on providing those services.
And that'd be a lose-lose for you and NBN Co, because obviously a big part of why they do all of this is because they're expected also to do a return under the whole basis that they were set up under.
And that's the thing, and their model is based on prices increasing over time, but retail services in telco generally don't change, or usually you get more value for the same or less dollars is how it normally rolls. And so that's where it kind of, the wholesale model is at odds with what's going on in the retail space.
So, Alex, with that, what Phil's saying there, if you compare that to mobile pricing, because I know you follow a lot of the mobile plans, do you see that they don't tend to get more expensive year for year, but you kind of get better value for money over time?
Oh, look, absolutely. I mean, and if you use the NBN itself as a good basis for this, back when it was first mooted, if you went over a gig on your phone plan, you may as well remortgage the house.
Yeah.
Whereas these days it's $10, or in some cases for some providers it's nothing at all. They're starting to use shaping, which we used to see back in the old ADSL days, as opposed to excess charges. We've not seen that so much in the NBN space. Although, Phil, I understand NBN Co and the ACCC, they're consulting on some longer term price changes.
That's correct. So ACCC, well, the comms minister has given a statement of expectations to the ACCC to say, we want you to go in and look at NBN pricing. ACCC has said, yep, we're absolutely keen to do that, and we're keen to look at it from a blank sheet of paper perspective. So take away all the preconceived ideas and start from scratch. And so we're very encouraged by that. The downside is that process will probably take 2+ years to play out.
And is the danger then that then hurts the industry more? We maybe we lose some players, or we see some consolidation, and then the industry's worse off, or consumers are worse off?
I think it's all of those things. I think there's a real risk that retail prices will move again. And I think you'll start to see that as early as later this year, because ultimately the trajectory we're seeing, the data growth and where the cost models are at, that will play out across most retail providers in that time frame.
And I may be misunderstanding this, but from my understanding of the way the ACCC stepped in the past, the last consultation they had on NBN pricing was back in 2013, like literally pre-multi-technology mix.
Yeah, that's pretty right. And look, I probably am not across it as tightly as I should be, but at the moment, NBN's SAU, their special undertaking, only covers fibre to the premises, fixed wireless, and satellite. It doesn't actually cover the other multi-technology mixed products. And so I know NBN want to bring all those other products in under their SAU, and so that's also being seen as the sort of the leverage point here is that they want something, and so the ACCC are going to say, well, if you want that thing, then you need to play our game.
So if they're starting with a blank slate and presumably all options were on the table, what are the alternatives? What are other ways they could do this a pricing model that would work a bit better?
Look, our view of the world is that they should basically, when the reason we've wound up in this situation is it was all designed when people were transferring off ADSL, they wanted to make it a soft transition from ADSL to NBN. And so the access price was set lower, but the variable component, the CVC, was set higher. And so ultimately there needs to be a rebalancing of those things. And it's quite interesting when you look at it, it doesn't actually need to rebalance very much at all. So if you moved, you could actually move to an access-only pricing model. Say on a 50/20 service, the wholesale price might be $46 instead of $45, but that would actually generate NBN similar revenues to what they're generating now. And so that rebalancing across the whole industry actually sort of solves the problem. And then any further changes in usage over time can probably be made up through efficiencies of NBN running a bit better.
And then as an end customer, that doesn't really affect me because that's just the pricing deal between you and the NBN, not between you and your customers.
Correct. And so that means retail prices stay about the same, end customers happy, NBN gets what it needs because it's got the retail or the margins that it needs, and the retailers don't have the exposure to the variable use component that is CVC.
Does that mean, in theory, even happier customers? Because, as I understand it, with the CVC leveraging, you have a pool of bandwidth which you are splitting amongst all of the users. If it's more based on that access charge, you're doing less of the splitting. Everyone's getting more of the pie that they need when they need it.
Yeah, look, that's it. It certainly takes all the pressure off the off that component. It makes it a lot easier for providers to manage. So we do a lot of moving bandwidth up and down on a daily basis. It would remove all the need for that. Means when things like game updates come through, suddenly you don't have everyone scrambling to upgrade capacity just because a new COD updates come out. So,
Are they still killing the network?
they're killing the network on a regular basis. So, yep.
All right, well, it will be very interesting to see how it plays out, and hopefully it doesn't take 2 years before we get some kind of resolution on this. Thanks very much, Phil, for taking the time to join us.
No worries. Thanks very much, guys.
So VR is one of those technologies that feels like it's sort of been around forever. But more recently, we've seen some rather bigger pushes into both the consumer and business space. And this week, HTC held its ViveCon. Chris, they had some new hardware to announce, didn't they?
They did indeed. A couple of big announcements. One that's a B2B enterprise headset, the HTC Vive Focus 3, which is solely focused on business, and then also an HTC Vive Pro 2, which is pretty exciting news for gamers.
So the business side of VR, that's not an area a lot of people think about with VR. Most people kind of go all Lawnmower Man-esque on it, as it were, to use a very dated reference.
God, you are old.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Says the man quoting Red Dwarf.
But the Vive Focus 3, it's quite a locked down little system, isn't it? It's not in any way an entertainment headset, is it?
Yeah, so I got a chance before ViveCon to have a good chat with the local country manager, and he was talking me through about just how isolated the Focus 3 is from the other HTC Vive products. So, you can't even use the controllers between the two headsets. It's kind of aloof from the rest of the peripherals that we've seen in the grander Vive ecosystem. But it also plugs into this whole different back end in terms of the Vive Business App Store, which doesn't plug into the Viveport App Store, which we're familiar with all the games that we play. And there's a lot of different stuff in terms of the way it could be integrated into like IT departments in terms of security and being able to look in and track things. And it's becoming quite like the way that they spoke to me about it was, wow, I didn't realize how big it had become with businesses in terms of training and design and a difference it's making to the efficiency and speed of a lot of companies out there.
Because that's one of the things they've always talked about with VR and AR. It's potential for things like training and other business applications, but it always seems like a potential thing in the future. Yet all anyone was ever doing was playing games with it. So they are betting big on that.
Yeah, well, look, they're going for an end-to-end solution here. So it's just not just about providing the hardware that you just buy off a shelf. It's about getting people into this, this full service where they're providing like, as part of the Focus 3, you get 24 months worth of access to the enterprise business warranty and service. You get 6 months access to their XR suite of programs. They supply a lot of apps that can be deployed by companies and used without all that effort being from scratch on their part. And they've set up the system in terms of the way that the IT can look in and how it uses Android Enterprise to basically allow for these companies to set up multiple VR headsets, Focus 3 headsets within their organisation, and then train staff. Or it can be customer fronting as well. Like we spoke about real estate agents, for example, using these as a new means of showing people potential purchases they'd like to make in the housing market. So some of the things that were really interesting was some of the high-end motor vehicle manufacturers using it as part of their design. So a whole bunch of people, even if they're not in the same area, like remotely, can pile into one room and look around a 3D model of a design of the car and make real-world changes and real-world feedback. Real-time feedback, and they're talking about this halving the design and development time of these cars. So pretty impressive. And they showed up in the briefing that I had. They showed up a list of all the companies that they've been working with, and it was a staggering list. It had companies like Disney in there and Bugatti, like big names. So definitely a massive side of the business is the business.
Yes.
Yeah. Although, am I the only one in the room that just thinks, hang on, real estate agents showing me around a VR house, I'm not going to trust what they're showing me at all?
They can pick your pocket at the same time. You won't even notice.
Well, we've all seen those wide-eyed lens shots of rooms that you get into and you wonder how anyone could fit in it.
Yeah. On the technology front, and this is actually true, I think, for the Vive Pro 2, the gaming one, that they're talking them up as having 5K displays. It's not exactly 5K though, is it, Chris?
It's a bit cheeky. It is a bit cheeky. So really it's two 2.5K screens. So if you're a marketing guy and you want to add those together, then yes, you could say it's 5K. I was having a bit of a look around this morning, actually, just kind of seeing how other people pitch their headsets. And we've seen this before. Like there's some that pitch themselves as being 8K headsets because they've got two 4K displays and things like that. So not an unusual tactic, but yeah, a little bit cheeky.
They're also reasonably high refresh rates. Although the Pro 2, I think, gets the edge. It's 120 hertz, where the Focus 3 is, I think, 90 hertz.
Yeah, that's correct. So big jump there for the Pro 2. And obviously the Pro 2 is tethered to a PC, so can do a little bit more grunt than you can do with the wireless Focus 3. So that knows no doubt the reason for the difference in the refresh rate.
Having spent some time with a lot of the early VR headsets, but not so much in the last couple of years, looking at the spec sheets for the new ones, the thing that really jumped out at me was the field of view. And the field of view is now pushed out to 120 degrees, which means you're not so much, the world you see is not in a little square in front of you, but more sort of around you. Would you agree, I would say that field of view is one of the most important specs when it comes to a VR headset.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm really looking forward to experiencing it. It's a really hard thing to talk about beforehand, but I have spoken to people who have experienced it, and they say it's just like that extra 10, that because the Vive Pro was 110, that extra 10 degrees makes a world of difference when you're actually in the experience. And when you combine that as well with we had a laugh then about the 2.5K headset being called 5K, but realistically, that 2448 by 2448 pixel screen is still, like the highest we're looking at the moment. So it might laugh it off, but it's still a really high resolution screen. You pair that with a good refresh rate and such a wide field of view, and yeah, it's a really, really, really exciting piece of tech.
They're talking about it losing one of the things that always bugged me with that early VR, which was the whole kind of screen door thing, which you always got with those super cheap, like phone-based VR, Google Daydream, and the Gear VR stuff that Samsung did. They're talking that being essentially gone. But is that something, do we know, that's app-dependent or tech-dependent? As in, if I throw existing VR stuff at it, is it going to be better now with this straight away, or does it have to be programmed for?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, mate. They showed me some side-by-sides when it comes to the screen door effect on the new models versus the old models. And look, I wouldn't say it's completely gone, for sure. It's definitely a lot better, but I wouldn't say it's completely gone. And, we've seen this in the past, like what's the app going to actually be delivered at from a software perspective? So maybe we should be considering this as a up to, when we're talking about the resolution, the refresh rate, and so forth, and therefore the impact it has on the screen door effect. But I think there's going to be a natural upscale, and there's some new technology here. And I'm just having a quick hunt because I wrote it down this morning. Display stream compression. So that's on the Vive Pro 2, and HTC are claiming that they're the first headset to feature this technology, which was done in conjunction with AMD and NVIDIA, and basically allows for larger files to be compressed and transferred between the headset and the PC at a better rate, therefore allowing older display ports to kind of upscale. So that'll be interesting. So I would suspect, therefore, that you will see a natural improvement, but there will be a bottleneck there, I suggest, depending on how the software has been provided by the developers.
So for people who are playing along at home who maybe haven't tested a VR headset before or heard that term, what's the screen door effect?
Oh, like literally like looking through a screen door in your mum's kitchen, mate.
Like through the fly wire, so you can see all the little lines, and it's like looking through mesh.
Yes, that's basically it, yeah. And look, it's definitely a lot better in the comparison shots, but until we get a chance to go hands-on in probably 2 or 3 weeks from now, we won't know for sure.
Yeah. The other bottleneck I suspect for a lot of people with these is these are premium priced devices. I mean, the Focus 3, I think, is just shy of $2,000, and the Vive Pro 2's 2,200 or thereabouts.
Yeah, no, they're going with an interesting approach for the Vive Pro 2. So you can actually just buy the headset by itself for $12.99. And I was looking at the site this morning, and they've also got a newsletter sign up at the moment that gives you an extra $80 off and a couple of months of free access to a service. So they're pitching it as a very much an upgrade path for people who are existing members of the Vive ecosystem. So all the existing technology is backwards compatible. In fact, there's no even new controllers that come with the Vive Pro 2. So you're looking at the most recent edition of the Wand, which came out in 2018. So you can actually just buy the headset itself if you've got any of the existing technology. And then in August, so this is a couple of months after that initial release, there will be a kit available that is adds a base station and also the controllers in, which comes in at just under 2.2. But I'm a bit confused by that because I had a look through the Vive website today, and if you buy those 3 components on their own, it actually comes up to $1,948, I think it was, dollars. So I'm not sure where they're getting an extra $300 from.
Shipping
maybe
box.
there's something that's included. Yeah, that's it. So, and when I spoke to the local country manager, he said he's fully expecting the retail partners to come up with their own kits as well. So hopefully we'll be able to, if you're fresh to VR, you'll be able to buy in for under $2,000.
This actually brings up an important point, which we haven't yet raised, about the Vive Pro 2 relative to the business model. The Vive Pro 2 still relies on having those tracking stations around you to work out where you are. It's still tethered to a PC. It's not freestanding. It's not all in that way. So if you just bought the headset itself, you wouldn't be able to do much with it if you didn't already have those trackers, right?
Absolutely, all the controllers, of course, as well. So if there's one kind of bit of a letdown with the Vive Pro 2, as we've seen with the information we have so far, it's that the tracking isn't built in. So when we look at the Focus 3, which is coming out in the same month, it has quad camera tracking built into the headset itself, and it also comes with brand new controllers. So you've got to wonder why there wasn't more. I mean, I guess it comes down to price and trying to get that entry point down, but it's a bit of a shame that you've still got to have that tracking station set up.
I would have thought that I think they call it outward facing tracking. So outward facing tracking is, as you say, when you got cameras on the headset that looks around the room. So it's fully self-contained to figure out where it is in the room, where the old way of doing it is you've got to put cameras around the room to look at you. I would have thought that old way of doing it, inward facing tracking, whatever the term for it, would be one of the biggest things holding VR back. So I would think they'd be doing absolutely everything they could to move to this new outward facing tracking using built-in cameras. Do you think that that's a mistake and that's going to hold them back?
Yeah, look, it's absolutely a barrier to entry for people, especially depending on the size of your room and what kind of space you've got. I guess perhaps when there's a $700 difference in price between the two headsets, how much of that dollar value is down to those built-in trackers? You still got to buy a tracker, right? Though, so if you're going to buy a base station, I think they're $310. So you're no better off really anyway.
There's an interesting point of comparison here, though, because if you look at what Oculus has done, they've basically said we want all-in only, because the Quest 2 is basically now their standardized headset for everyone, and it does not rely on outside trackers. And honestly, I mean, I know you've tested it, Chris, I've tested it. It does a pretty good job in most spaces of, not killing you by making you trip over the cat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, when I was speaking to the country manager, he was telling me a lot about. He kept reiterating the fact that they're going for the absolute highest end here. So they're looking for people who are so dedicated to this VR experience. They're going to have like super powerful PC rig. They're going to have a space set up for it, and they're really targeting that demographic. So therefore, it doesn't make sense to me that you wouldn't go all in and put the trackers in the actual headset itself. But it does open the market opportunity up for the likes of PSVR 2 and Oculus Quest and whatever Oculus does next to perhaps find a nice medium there.
Yeah, HTC's always gone for that high end. I mean, I had to look this up actually because I was at their initial brief when they launched the first HTC Vive. I had to look up when that was because it was in Barcelona at Mobile World Congress. That was 2015, which in tech terms is not that long ago. We're only talking about like a 6-year product cycle, but they've never looked at that kind of more consumer cheap end of the market, if you will, which is obviously where Oculus sits. It's like the most expensive one is $639 for the high-end storage Quest 2, so that's a lot cheaper than this. We don't know what the PlayStation 5 PSVR will cost, but I don't think I'd be going out on a limb to say it'll cost less than a PlayStation 5.
Yeah, well, I mean, I looked at this as well when the PlayStation VR originally came out. It was priced around the same price as the PS4 was at that time, which I think was about 3 or 4 years into the PS4's life cycle. And by the time PSVR 2 comes out, which is expected no earlier than 2022, the PS5 may have seen a bit of a price drop by then. So it's likely to probably be around that $700 mark here in Australia, which is, almost half the price. That's right.
There have been, I mean, Sony has been just quietly doling out the info about PlayStation 5 VR. I mean, I would argue, and you might disagree, Chris, it's probably not the right time to be buying the original PSVR kit, is it?
No, and especially because it's not natively supported on the PS5 anyway. And we've seen, if you want to play it on the PS5, you've got to get a link cable. Sony, to their credit, gives you that link cable for free. So that link cable allows the old PS4 camera to work with the new PS5, and you need the camera as your tracking device. I ordered that in November. It arrived in March. So it's quite a wait for those. And there hasn't been an influx in new games recently. There's a couple dripping out here and there, but you can kind of tell that whole ecosystem's just on pause a little bit at the moment. And I can't imagine there's much value at the moment in buying a PSVR headset if you own there's definitely none if you own a PS5, and it's not really come down enough in price to really say do it for a PS4 at this point.
Well, I was going to get onto this as well because the other thing, so often with these new tech pieces, we talk about there being a killer app, the thing that everyone has to have. I'm not 100% convinced that there is yet a killer VR app in the consumer space. Maybe you know difference. If you had to suggest a VR app or a VR game that everyone should try at least once, what would it be?
Oh, geez. I quite like some of the co-op games. There was, I take it from a perspective of what I could do with my kids, being that that's where I am now in my life, and playing some of the very original launch Astro Playroom stuff, which I was able to do with my kids, was just a lot of fun. Even the original, I think it was called Eagle View by Ubisoft that came out at the launch of the PlayStation VR. That was a really fun experience. And there's been a few during. I mean, Half-Life Alyx is obviously the one that a lot of people have jumped to, and that's probably a bit of a benchmark at the moment. But yeah, we really haven't, I guess, seen, like you say, the software come along like we're starting to see the hardware come along. But it will happen.
So Grand Theft Auto 6 VR edition, basically.
We can play Skyrim in VR now, Doom 3 in VR. There are a lot of old games getting a VR makeover, so you never know. Maybe GTA 5 might get a makeover. There've been a few.
I don't want to think about the Skyrim VR bugs. That would be haunting stuff.
So we talked before about the tracking. Is there anything else? Like, what's the biggest thing that's holding VR back from your average punter getting into it?
Oh, geez. I think for a lot it's price. Yeah. It is price. I mean, you can't get around the fact that it just costs a lot of money. And it's a shame because once you're actually playing games in VR, it's just like, wow, it's really, really good. And you start forgetting a little bit about the fact that the resolution hasn't quite caught up. And, we've just moved to the PS5 generation. All of a sudden it's super shiny and pretty again, and we're all being blown away again like we were 7 years ago when we got a new console. But the VR's a long way behind it, so it's not going to blow you away necessarily. But as soon as you get into the experience and you start looking around and you realise you're in this world, it's so mind-blowing. So it's such a shame that the buy-in's so much. And then when you look at stuff like the Vive, then you've got to also take into consideration you're probably likely going to need a PC upgrade. So it's not just even a case of getting a headset. It's a case of getting a headset and making sure your PC is up to spec. And it just gets really, really expensive.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Chris for joining us for this week's show.
No worries, guys. It was great.
So, Chris, now is the time for you to face the classic Vertical Hold questions. 3 of them, to be precise.
Righto.
Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And the big contentious question, which science fiction TV show is the all-time best?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, you can find my work at finder.com.au. I've got a lot of stuff up there around the VR space. In particular, we're looking at the new HTC products and the PSVR 2, and I'm getting those units in shortly, so there'll be a lot around that. In terms of my social, Old Mate Media is actually the name that I go by on social media, so look that up. And in terms of the best sci-fi of all time, geez, yeah, I've been watching The Expanse lately. That's one that's right on probably the tip of my tongue since I've just finished, just caught up on that. So The Expanse is pretty cool. Like Battlestar Galactica, that was really good.
Old Battlestar or new Battlestar?
New Battlestar.
Okay.
And Star Trek Discovery, I've been into that lately. Westworld, like that.
Old Westworld or new Westworld?
This man's a classicist.
The Westworld show was good.
I'll tell you what I didn't get into. That's probably more surprising, especially since I love Star Wars, but I did not get into The Mandalorian.
Don't even start me on The Mandalorian. It had so many problems.
Yeah, it didn't rate it. Too many plot holes. Didn't understand the point of it. Yeah,
absolutely with you on that.
Didn't do it for me.
And now I'm left wondering if I can do this podcast on my own after I kick both of you out.
I know. Controversial. Absolutely.
And also, obviously, we should give thanks to Phil Britt for joining us earlier on the show. You can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at verticalhold.com.au on the web, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And as always, thanks everyone for listening. We're not quite ready to upgrade to be a virtual reality show yet, but when we are, you'll be the first to know. Don't forget to tell your friends about us and leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice to help us spread the good word in 2021. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.